When journalism gets controversial, is it time to get the CIA involved? Apparently, that's what one of the New York Times reporters did. Times reporter Mark Mazzetti reportedly forwarded an advance copy of Maureen Dowd's column to a CIA spokesperson. The piece was about the film Zero Dark 30, which is about the killing of Osama bin Laden. Here's a look at the trailer.
Where was the last time you saw bin Laden?
Oh my God, is that what I think it is?
Where was the last time you saw bin Laden?
Dowd's column criticized the White House for giving Hollywood inside information to make this film while leaving the public in the dark about the operation. This is all coming to light thanks to documents disclosed by the transparency group Judicial Watch. To talk more about this, I'm joined now by Jeff Cohen, media critic and journalism professor at Ithaca College. Jeff, welcome. So does sending an unpublished column to a government agency, as this New York Times reporter did, would you say that it violates media ethics?
Well, there's no doubt that it does. You know, the job of an independent reporter who's covering a powerful institution like the CIA, your job is to get leaks from honest, ethical people inside that agency so you can tell the American public what's going on with that powerful agency. The leaks are not supposed to go in the opposite direction, where a newspaper reporter is giving a column 2 days before it's in the newspaper to the CIA. That's just not how it's supposed to work. It's an example of the kind of collusion that often happens in big U.S. media outlets. You know, when it comes to national security stories, like those involving the CIA, we have a media that sometimes operates more as a fourth branch of government than as an independent fourth estate. And I think that's what's reflected not only in this reporter sort of helping the CIA by giving them a column and saying, look, you didn't get this from me, delete it after you read. You have nothing to worry about. See, there's little to worry about for the CIA. That's not the job of a reporter in a free society. You're not supposed to assure someone at a powerful agency they have nothing to worry about. If you're an independent reporter, you want that powerful agency to worry about you and your news outlet and what you might be digging up about them.
What do you think it says about the Times, or at least this reporter's priorities and I guess who they're looking out for? I mean, usually your first loyalty should be to the public to disclose this information. But I mean, what does this say their priorities are?
There's no doubt that your priority, if you're an independent journalist in a free press, in a free democratic society, your obligation is to the public. But here, this reporter clearly was trying to show an obligation to his source, the most powerful intelligence agency in the world, the CIA. And the problem isn't just this reporter. The managing editor of the New York Times, when asked about this, kept going on about how this is much ado about nothing. And then the spokesperson for the New York Times said, oh, this was a mistake. This was a guy who was doing some fact checking. No, the email correspondence between this reporter and the CIA official shows a relationship that's completely unethical, that's completely involved with collusion. And I really believe that it's a pattern at the New York Times. You know, the New York Times, Bill Keller, one of the top people there during WikiLeaks, he admitted that he was taking direction from the federal government on what WikiLeaks material could be published and could not be published. During the Bush administration, the New York Times had a story before the 2004 election that the Bush administration had spied on many Americans through warrantless wiretaps, which was a clear violation of federal law. And the New York Times was asked by the Bush administration, hold that story, and they held it for more than a year. It didn't come out till late in 2005. So it's part of this collusion. You know, U.S. media like to lecture the rest of the world about the need for a free press and how the state should not control the media. But when it comes to national security in our country, there's all too much collusion between the elite media outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine, NPR. There's too much collusion between these institutions, these press institutions, and the institutions of the national security state.
So you're saying that too often the media works with the government instead of trying to expose the wrongdoings of the government?
No doubt about it. I mean, what kind of reporter would do this kind of thing, play this sort of helpful PR role for the CIA, and then the next day turn around and try to expose possible wrongdoing by that agency to the American public? No, it's unlikely. And as I say, the problem at the New York Times, as we saw from the reactions of the bosses here, not just this reporter has not spoken, but the reaction of the New York Times PR spokesperson and the New York Times managing editor, that to me is more worrisome almost than what this reporter did, which was outrageous enough.
It kind of brings up this interesting relationship because reporters oftentimes, in order to get the inside scoop, they develop these relationships with their sources. It should be this professional relationship. Clearly, Mazzetti has this relationship with an official within the CIA. Jeff, I want to ask you, what is the line between this and unethical behavior? How do you keep that relationship in check so you don't violate the rules of journalistic ethics?
Well, clearly, when you're leaking information from your newspaper to the agency you're covering, that crossed all ethical lines. The problem, you're getting at one of the biggest problems in U.S. media, that these reporters sit on these beats for too long, whether it's Wall Street, whether it's the White House, whether it's Congress, whether it's the CIA. And they often develop an unhealthy, cozy relationship with their sources. The main obligation, you said at the beginning of this interview, should be to the American public, to the reading and viewing public. But when you get that, when you're too long at your beat and too cozy with your sources, after a while, you're no longer exposing things about the agencies, these powerful agencies, to the public. Too often you're sitting on information. You're so cozy with your sources that you couldn't expose them if you tried.
So this surely has to be embarrassing for the New York Times as this becomes public. Do you think that this revelation will lead to any changes?
Nothing's changing at the New York Times. It seems to get worse. You know, at the journalism department in Ithaca College, there's a bunch of us that study U.S. media history. And you look back over 40 years since the Pentagon Papers, where the New York Times and other papers said on a national security issue, no, our allegiance is to the public. We're going to stand up against the government. You look from Pentagon Papers to today, and you see 40 years of these big institutions like the New York Times just getting cozier and cozier and cozier. And one of the classic examples I mentioned was sitting on a story for more than a year that the Bush administration was engaging in warrantless wiretapping on Americans and holding that till after the 2004 election. That's pretty telling. And asking for federal government direction on what WikiLeaks material the Times should publish or not publish. Things are getting worse at the New York Times. I don't expect them to turn around because of this incident.
Really interesting, Jeff. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. That was Jeff Cohen, journalism professor at Ithaca College and a media critic.